Welcome to today's webinar with Passive House Canada, From the Ground Up. My name is Jessica, and I am the Trade Show and Event Manager for the Western Retail Lumber Association, and your host and one of your facilitators today. For anyone on today's webinar who might not be familiar with the Western Retail Lumber Association, or WRLA as we like to call ourselves, we are a member-based organization that advocates, connects, and educates the building supply industry in Western Canada to facilitate the growth of our members' businesses. You can find us at WRLA.org. So before I start, I just wanted to, I think I just missed my slide. Sorry, guys. There we are. Before I start, I want to extend a very big thank you to today's sponsor, Taiga Building Products. Since 1973, Taiga has been committed to serving the building material industry, focused on supplying the best products on the market. Taiga has a large product portfolio, including, but not limited to, JM Insulation, DuPont Styrofoam, Tyvek Home Wrap, Trex Decking and Railing, Allura Fiber Cement, and LP Engineered Wood Siding. In conjunction with these standalone products, Taiga also develops and produces proprietary products such as pressure-treated lumber, laminate, and vinyl flooring, as well as pre-finished siding developed specifically for our, right now, very volatile North American climate, because it's very much snowing here in Winnipeg right now, guys. Taiga are really great people doing whatever it takes, and you can visit them at taigabuilding.com for more information and to explore the product categories. So before I introduce our speakers, I just wanted to give you the 411 on how you can ask questions. So everybody is muted. You should be able to hear us and see our speakers. If you want to ask questions, look below. There is a chat and a Q&A buttons. We're going to monitor those questions, and Mark and Chris may answer them as they go, or we may facilitate them at the end with some Q&A time. We are recording, and a copy of this will be posted to our website. So without that, I'd like to introduce Chris Ballard, CEO of Passive House Canada, and Mark Bernhardt, President of Bernhardt Contracting. Take it away, guys.
Thanks. We'll have Mark take control of the slides here when he's able to. Great. And listen, I wanted to start off by thanking your organization for inviting us to present today. It's wonderful to be here. We are, as you said, Passive House Canada. We are about building better and feeling better. Mark, next slide.
Right on that. Are you seeing the transition there?
No, I'm not.
Okay, just a second. Let me
okay.
adjust. Do a different type of share here.
Okay.
There we go. How about that?
There we go. I was going to say, folks, talk among yourselves. So first question you may have for us is, who is Passive House Canada? Well, we're a membership-based social enterprise. So we do a lot of advocacy around high-performance building. We provide education and professional development. We provide technical services to our members in the industry. Our members are primarily architects, engineers, GCs, tradespeople. We have members and staff and instructors right across Canada. Next slide. One thing I like to point out at the very beginning is that Passive House Canada and the whole Passive House International building standard has Canadian DNA. What we're looking at here is the Saskatchewan Conservation House, built in 1977. Part of the project was with a Saskatchewan engineer by the name of Harold Orr. And I don't know, Mark, I've lost the slide.
Oh, it's gone again, hey?
Yeah.
Squishy there.
But I'll just tell you, back in 1977, there was an oil crisis. The price of oil went way up, and governments were concerned. How are we going to stay warm in the wintertime? The result of that is that NRCan and the government of Saskatchewan built this house to test some of the current ideas about how you heat a house with minimal amount of energy in a cold Saskatchewan winter. That house, Saskatchewan Conservation House, still standing today. still has a family living in it, still performing to the standard of that it was designed to. Europeans came along and looked at this house and a number of others in other cold climates and said that there's a lot to learn. They took the data home, they took the design and the ideas behind it back to Europe, they codified it, and today we have the Passive House Institute building standard, which is recognized globally as the best way to high performance or net zero buildings, both houses, commercial, and public spaces around the world. So we're called Passive House, but we are more than houses. We are a commercial space, institutional space, as well as houses. So Mark, have we got the slides back?
If you're not seeing them, maybe Jess could chime in here. Is it just Chris that's not seeing the slides there, or is
I believe it is just Chris. I am on
Okay.
our mission right now.
Okay.
Good. So
Good.
that's good. That is not my fault then. That's what's
No,
key.
no, it's my fault.
Yeah.
And I don't know. Give me 1 second here.
Well, everybody that works in construction will know that one of the first things you learn as an apprentice is to have a scapegoat. So
Yeah.
as long as we've figured that out, then we're good.
It will scapegoat. Can we scapegoat the technology? And maybe, yeah, well, look at that.
Sure.
It's not, it really isn't. I really can't see it where I'm
I'll start and stop it again, and then
Okay.
it might pop up on your screen again for you.
Okay, that would be great because it was there for the longest time. There we are. There's our mission. So our mission is we have three things that we focus on. We're here to make zero emission buildings known and adopted by government, industry, and the public. We support government and industry in the transition to, oh, I just lost it again for whatever reason. We help government and industry in the transition to high performance, zero based or zero emission buildings. And finally, we're advocates for the Passive House Institute building standard because it is globally recognized as the best way, the fastest way to get to near zero when it comes to building standards. So I'm at a bit of a disadvantage, Mark, in that I can't see the slide. So I'm not sure what's up next. And it's back again. I'm just closing down absolutely everything on my desktops to make sure that you're the only thing that's here. So why build to the Passive House standard? Well, there's a number of reasons. First of all, passive houses, passive buildings have exceptionally good air quality. Mark will get into this a bit later. They're very comfortable places to live in, to work in. Really good thermal warmth. Durability. There's a quality assurance that comes to building to Passive House that Mark will talk more about later on. That in order to be certified, you have to meet a very high standard. And of course, they are super energy efficient. You know, oftentimes designers will talk about it takes you and your dog to heat your house, and that's about it. And of course, on the top of mind of many of us these days is GHG reductions. If you're not having to burn fossil fuels to heat your house, then you're helping with GHG reductions. And overall, quite a cost savings when you move to a Passive House style of building. So next, and why are we doing this? Well, let's just look at the big focus these days is on energy efficiency. And here's a very simple chart that the federal government through NRCan has provided us about energy use intensity for buildings in Canada. You can see that if you build, well, you maybe can't see, but if you look at the red square that has 15, thanks, Mark, you're looking at about an 88 to 93% reduction in space heating demand when you move from code built buildings to a Passive House style building. And you'll see on the right-hand side, and I'll talk more about this in a minute, but where our country and countries around the world are going is about reducing our energy consumption. So you can see that where we need to get it down to that, close to that 15 is more attainable using the Passive House style of building than continuing on with current code. So we know where we're going. We know where the world is going. Passive House is perhaps the easiest way to get us all there. Next slide, Mark. So going back many years, every province, every territory in Canada signed on to the Pan-Canadian Framework on Clean Growth and Climate Change. That's literally every province and every territory signed on to this. And it's a roadmap to zero emission buildings. So when we talk about zero emission buildings, we know that by 2050, every building in Canada will be zero emission. In essence, they'll be passive houses by then. We need to make those new buildings more energy efficient, and we are adopting these increasingly stringent model building codes and adopting that net zero energy ready model by 2030. So by 2050, it will be in place, but by 2030, we'll have that model. And some provinces even sooner. So we're working on the national, we being the federal government and all the provinces and territories are working on a harmonized national building standard. This is the proposed national code that will guide everyone to net zero ready by 2030 and net zero by 2050. Seems like a long way away, but it's really not. It's just around the corner. We have to get ready to get there. Next. So, Mark, you're going to talk about what a passive house is.
Yeah. So this is one of the questions we get. I mean, we built a fair number of passive houses in our days here, and I'm actually sitting in one now. So hopefully you can hear how quiet, comfortable it is in here. But starting with what they look like, this is a house we built a few years ago. It's a sixplex, little low-rise urban in Victoria. And I can assure you all that it is as sunny as it is shown in the picture there. The grass is green. I heard there was some snow in Winnipeg. That's unfortunate because our tulips are flowering outside my window here. So that's an important information to convey. So what do they look like every house? So if you walk by this on the street, you probably wouldn't notice the difference. It's they're hard to pick out. If you start looking closely, you'll see some differences. Think thicker walls and different things like that. But generally, they look like any house. Inside, it's the same thing. We're not compromising finish. We're not compromising, design, all sorts of things like that. Inside, it looks like a regular house. And for the most people that walk into a house like this, I mean, I spend much more time talking about the paint colors than I do the insulation in the walls, which actually kind of annoys me. And that's why I spend most of my time helping other builders build passive house so they can talk about paint colors. And I can talk about insulation and things like that. So when we talk about build better, what do we mean, right? We mean super insulation, usually a significant amount more than what we would traditionally see in a code-built house. We talk about airtight construction. If you're leaking air, you're also leaking heat and moisture through your envelope, so that has a potential durability issue there. We're talking about thermal bridge free, and so traditional construction quite often will have even steel beams coming through the insulated envelope. And that creates a space where mold can grow inside there in places we generally would find that undesirable. We're using higher quality windows and doors. So quite often these would be triple pane. They would have different coatings on them depending on the situation. And we are not necessarily orienting all the windows to the south. In fact, in a lot of our projects, we're not doing that. We're doing maybe even sometimes the opposite. What we're doing is we're taking advantage of the sun where we need it. We're using nature with what it provides rather than trying to fight nature with air conditioning and things like that. And we're having a very good ventilation strategy. So when we airtight a building, we need to get fresh air into that building somehow, but we want that to be managed and controlled. And we don't want to waste energy while we're doing it. So a very good ventilation system. And that also provides then very good filtered air inside. And that results in these kind of side benefits a lot of times. We talk about the energy efficiency all the time. And as energy nerds and the engineering types, we'll often focus on the energy. But the real benefits, I think, are this feeling better. When I talk to a client about one of these houses, I talk about feeling better. I talk about my quality of life. I talk about how I'm not in energy poverty and things like that. I don't necessarily talk about my energy bills. And that was actually a lesson we learned early on in the marketing of this, is that very few of our clients actually cared what their energy bills were. It's about that, that quality of life and that health and comfort that comes with as a byproduct of chasing that energy efficiency. So then what it is in technical terms, the Passive House Institute, the one based in Darmstadt, it defines Passive House there's a few different things. This is the simplistic definition here, is that it cannot use more than 15 kilowatts of heat per meter squared. And now if you're looking at some of the codes and standards, you will see numbers that are similar to that. Passive House is measured a little bit more strictly, so they're not quite equivalent, but the idea is that this is how hard your furnace has to work to keep the house warm. And that puts a limit on it. And when we put that strict limit on it, it forces us to look at other options for heating and keeping the heat that we have, or the very limited amount of heat that we have already. The primary energy is another way of saying source energy. You might have heard that before, where this is the energy generated at the power generation station, and then all the transmission losses to your house. They calculate all of the energy that this house actually uses for its operation. And that, again, is pretty strict. So that'll drive us to look for efficient technologies and a lot of things like our heating systems, probably driving towards, heat pumps and things like that. And then, of course, the air tightness. That'll be the critical one. And the limit for Passive House is 0.6. Now, that does sound ambitious, but with a little bit of practice, a little bit of training, that is quite achievable for most qualified builders. So what does this mean for suppliers? And I know a lot of folks on the call are suppliers of building materials. And so it's important to discuss what that means for you guys at the contractor desk at your local supplier store. For me, when I'm coming to shop for the supplies for our next project, we're going to use a lot of insulation. Obviously, this is going to be a pretty thick insulated wall, so that's what we're going to be buying a lot of. We're also going to be a bit picky about a few things, like air tightness and thermal bridging and things like that. So we're going to be looking for products that allow us to do air tightness very well, and products that don't require steel brackets and things like that to go through our insulation layer. And our build schedules might also be a little different. Quite often we will insulate the outside of the building and leave the inside, and so our trades might come in a different order than what you're traditionally seeing. There are 100 different ways which a passive house can be built, and built very well. There's some examples of the walls on the bottom. I think we've tried all of these plus another dozen others. We're looking to find the best one, and I'll get back to you when I found the best one. I've been doing this for a decade and still haven't. We're still fine tuning, but there's a lot of different options. There's no set way. You don't have to use this particular material. You don't have to do it any which way. There's all sorts of, it's kind of the beauty of the flexibility of it. So in terms of what suppliers need to have on their shelf, when I first started building the house I'm in now, which is now almost a full decade old, we had to special order stuff, also all kinds of things. I'm really happy to say that we don't have to do that anymore. Our local suppliers here on Vancouver Island actually have almost all of the materials we need to construct a passive house today on the shelf already. And that would be true across the country. Most of the materials that we have already are passive house suitable. We don't need to have certified little bits here and there and stuff. Some of the certified products make it easier, like windows and doors and things like that, make it easier for us to get our certifications. But the general supplies, the nails are the nails, the 2x4s are still 2x4s, although they do cost a lot more today. Those are all the same. What we might want to look for are things like better air sealing products. And you can build a passive house with Tyvek and duct tape if you want it. That is possible. I would argue it's a little more difficult, just because those materials aren't as flexible as we like to see. So things I like to see in an air sealing product are something that is stretchy, right? Buildings move. I want the tape and the sealants to move with them. I want no VOC tapes and sealants, because when the VOCs come out of that material, it gets brittle, and I want it to be a long-term durable product. So those are the sorts of things I'm looking for in an air sealing product. I'm also looking for higher performance windows. So there are a lot of Canadian manufacturers making passive house certified high performance windows. In fact, in some of our far northern projects that we've looked at, they're using these windows and have been for quite a long time. So a lot of these windows aren't even actually new to the market. They're maybe just newly marketed as high performance windows. And so if we're talking about our local lumber stores and stuff, we're looking for those higher performance windows, maybe not necessarily in stock, but available and having the salespeople on the, on the floor, understanding that they are available and what the options are. Also looking for higher performance ventilation systems. So there's right now, as far as I know, there isn't a lot of selection for really high performance HRVs. We sort of max out around 75% efficient for HRVs, and I want to see them up above that in the 80+ range. And right now, as far as I know, there aren't any North American manufacturers making them in that range. But so those are sorts of things I'd look to the future for. They're easy enough to get from other places. These aren't hard to get. There's a number of suppliers that carry them around here, but those are the sorts of things we'll be looking for in the future. And I think there's still a bit of innovation room available for our suppliers there. The last thing I'd like our local suppliers to have is a bit of training. And Chris is going to talk a bit more about what the options are here in a little while here. But when I first walked into some of the hardware stores around here and said, oh, I want to do this really thick wall, I got kind of the cross-eyed look thinking, oh, you're crazy. Why would you do that? That's not worth it. And that's a really outdated attitude, and a little bit of understanding. I don't need for suppliers to know the underlying physics of how the wall works. That's fine. But the understanding of why I might be doing this, what sort of materials might work, so understanding when I'm asking for something, well, here's 3 other things that maybe this will do the job and we've got in the shelf here or something like that. Those kind of basic understanding, right? So we're at least speaking the same language and understanding the same kind of broad concepts. And that then leads me to selling of high performance, whether there is a market for this, and is this something we're going to, kind of see in the long term. So this is something, actually, one of my experiences, a little bit unique across the country. I know there's been a few more that have been sold since in the last few years here. But for a number of years, I was the only one that had actually sold a passive house in North America for a few years. That has now changed, and that will change in rather dramatic fashion as some pretty big projects come online. And it's something we've been very successful at doing. Primarily by selling the health and comfort. We're not selling the energy efficiency. We're talking about health and comfort with our clients, and that's how it's primarily marketed. But the other thing we've done is we've essentially gotten out of the way and let the governments do it for us. Government policy is very well aligned with these sorts of buildings, and so this banner here is page 47 of the BC Energy Step Code Guide. And so the province is publishing our photos for us. We're very happy to have them do it for us. And this sort of buzz that is created by very high performance buildings still exists and can still be captured, and it makes it very easy to market and sell these buildings. They very much do sell themselves, and they stand out from the competition. And I want to give an example of how that works. So the North Park Passive House, which is this one that I've shown a few times here, this sixplex. We built that a number of years ago now, before the market was really hot. It was actually just kind of the end of 2012, and things weren't down in the dumps, but they weren't this blazing hot the way they are now. And when we went for sale on this one, it's officially spent 15 days on the market for all 6 units. Really, what that means is it sold out overnight. We in fact had backup offers for every single unit. It sold out in less than 24 hours. It just takes 15 days to close the deal. So that's why it shows up as 15. So, and we sold it during the framing stage. So this wasn't a completed project. It was in framing. And we were inexperienced developers at the time, really had no reputation, and we're still able to do that. It also sold for 8% above appraised value. We really had no idea what it would sell for, because nobody had ever sold a building like this before. The bank didn't know. We just kind of guessed and said 8% above appraised value sounded pretty reasonable. It was well above what the guys next door were doing. So we went with that. So all of this is in context with this news headline. Now, if you can read that news headline here, it's a Victoria man attempts suicide. It's actually a really terrible headline. This was front page news of CBC and every other news network in town on this day. This was the front page headline the day I put the for sale sign in the front lawn of this project. And I actually put the for sale sign in, and then police cars started showing up. Because you can see our project in the back of this photo here, right beside this green house, which is the Grizzly Murder House. There's the project right there. And in fact, this reporter was really nice to me and let me take down our company signs before he started taking pictures of the grisly murder house next door. And so, the moral of this story here is that if you can sell a house, a passive house next to a grisly murder house and still have clients be very happy and willing to pay for it, nobody bid back out of their deals. And of course, everybody knew about this. This wasn't going away. Then I think you can sell a high performance house anywhere. The other aspects of the data here we're seeing are really quite really quite overwhelming towards the high performance range of things as well. So, the surveys and the data being collected across the country, we're seeing this from, the CHBA's home buyers preference survey as well, that, 92 to 94% of people consider energy efficiency a key marketable feature in a home. So people are looking for it, people are asking for it. And they're asking for it for a bunch of different reasons, whether it be comfort and health, environmental stewardship, all sorts of things like that. There's also a growing realization that the higher performance homes are more resilient. That they will, survive disaster better. If that power goes out, it's not a big deal if you lose your heating for a few days. You can survive that. It's not going to be, might be a little uncomfortable, but it's not, it's not the end of the world. And then the health and wellness as well. I mean, the better air filtration, all these different things contribute to the health and wellness of the house, and these homes really do deliver quite a substantially different product in that regard. And COVID times really bring that home. So I'm going to pass it back to Chris to look to the future.
That's great, Mark. And once again, I've lost the slides. So if you would refresh for me.
I will do that.
Thank you. There we are. Looking to the future. So this is a few things happening here. We have a couple of examples, as I said early on, talking about the cooperation between provinces and territories to move to that net zero ready and net zero future. That's happening. That's rolling out across the country. A couple of great examples we have here. One is with BC. Here is their step code. Step 5 is to be net zero ready by 2032. And BC really has led the way across the country, but we also see in Ontario, which is, perhaps the largest housing market in the country. Again, 2030 net zero energy, planning to be net zero energy ready, and as all part of the National Harmonized Building Code that will be released shortly. So this is not a trend. This is the way of the future. The net zero home, the net zero building, it's here to stay. I know that your customers will be wandering in to your stores and wanting to talk about net zero. Perhaps they'll even know about Passive House. And we're here to help you get ready for those customer inquiries, or if you've got your contractors, your trades in talking about this. We're here to help you. We're here to help them as we transition to this net zero building. And Mark, I've lost you.
Darn it.
Yeah, I know, it's really strange. We're gonna blame the internet. That's the scapegoat today.
Let's blame Facebook.
Yeah, I'll give you a couple of examples happening in more and more municipalities across the country. Here's a couple of big ones. Toronto, Toronto in 2017 voted to declare a climate emergency, as many communities across the country have done, and to target greenhouse gas emissions. One of the outcomes of this is the Toronto Green Standard, which is a very ambitious building standard that is seeking net zero. The next is, and I've lost the slide again, Mark. The next is Vancouver, which is doing exactly the same thing, that near zero emissions building standard. And Vancouver and BC has been showing the rest of Canada the way in terms of lowering energy usage and driving down GHGs and building really, as Mark said earlier, very comfortable and healthy homes. Next slide, please. So as I said earlier, we're here to Passive House Canada exists to help business as the marketplace transitions to these high performance near zero, net zero buildings. We provide all types of training. Our website, which is the last slide here, our website has all of the information for you. But I'll give you just a clue on some of the, or a hint, some of the things that you may be interested in. We have an online self-paced training, our basic understanding of what a passive house building is. It's a great introductory course. Next slide, Mark. We have some upcoming courses. If you're interested in learning about embodied carbon, so Passive House, to go back a step, Passive House really looks at primarily operational carbon. What does it take to heat and condition the air in a building? That's operational carbon. But more and more people want to know about embodied carbon. So you'll hear that term more and more. So we're offering that course about identifying it and reducing that in the buildings, because we know that once operational carbon is driven down to zero, the next carbon on the horizon will be embodied carbon. That what is the carbon footprint that it took to create the building? We need to minimize that as much as possible. And we have a built-in Canada lessons from Passive House projects all around the country. Next slide.
I think.
Okay, that's it. There are no more slides.
We're getting close to our questions time here. We zipped through it.
I was
we
just
do
have questions.
Yeah, there's one great course I just wanted to highlight. We're working with the Manitoba Trades Institute and offering a course. So if you live in Manitoba,
yes,
check out our website, the Manitoba Trades Institute, Passive House for the Trades.
Okay.
So we do a lot of training for engineers, architects, building scientists, but we also do a lot of training for trades folks. And that's really going to be critical for your, perhaps for your customers.
Perfect. And that information is in the chat too.
Yeah, those trade ones I think are really key, and that's something where we hire from as well. Our local college at College is also partnered with Passive House Canada, and is looking to offer that training, and so we'll certainly be looking to hire from those courses, and be great to see a lot of those skills kind of really roll out in a little bit more mainstream.
Yeah, great. And we end with a quote from Yoda.
Yeah.
And then we're happy to take questions.
You know, who knew that Yoda was actually such a Passive House fan, right? He really does, embody the message.
That's
great. There is no try.
That's fantastic. Okay, so just to remind everybody, use the chat function below to ask questions. We did have a question from Jim, which was, could you define net zero a little bit more clearly?
Mark, I'll pass that one to you.
Sure. Yeah. So there are a few different definitions of net zero out there, so there is some confusion in the marketplace. If I'm talking, for me, net zero means my electrical meter on my house reads zero. That's what it means to me. The house will generate as much power as it consumes. There are some other definitions out there that base it on modeling and a few other different things, and maybe it's not actually zero at your meter, but that's what it means to me.
Thank you so much. We have a question here from Andy, which is, how functional are the Passive House renovation guidelines going to be? It seems like every situation would require a different approach.
And by that, and Mark, I defer to Mark on all things technical, because he's been doing this longer than me. They don't let me pick a hammer up, so I just get to talk. But Passive House has a standard for renovations. It's called EnerFit. We have been talking to governments about the RenoFit renovation standard that's on the horizon. EnerFit is an interesting question, because you really have to start with, is the building worth saving? Frankly, and there's going to be some tough decisions that we'll have to make. Do we put lots of money into buildings that really, frankly, aren't worth saving? Do we put money? Do we put money into a building that that isn't going to make it another 50 years. And so all the carbon that went into building or renovating that company is for naught. So there'll be some tough questions, but what can you add, Mark?
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Like we've come across a lot of people saying, "Oh, I want to retrofit because this or that," and a lot of times it comes down to the sentimental value in their house, which may be a real proper value. But I think houses that have genuine historic value or community value of some way could be retrofitted and are worth doing. But otherwise, we've looked at dozens of retrofits to do them. We've only actually completed a couple because it's just it's very easy and very cost effective, and the carbon argument and all the other arguments is actually in favor of ripping it down, recycling the building, which is very easy to do here in BC, and then building new. You can make it look like the old one if you want it, for often a fraction of the price, and then you get all the modern features of the new building. So it's a tough one. We've done it, but it is a tough one, and it really needs to be done, I think, for non-economic reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Melissa. She asks, low VOC plywooded insulation is in demand here. I'm not sure. Melissa, let us know where here is. How is this addressed in Passive House?
Well, so in Passive House specifically, it's not. So material selection is not part of the Passive House requirements. It's certainly part of best practices, and the people that are typically asking for a Passive House are looking at these other things as well. And so, we'll quite often look at the Living Building Challenge Red list, for example, which has a whole list of things we want to avoid, like PVC and different things like that. So certainly the low VOC plywood, paints, tapes, all these different things are in high demand, I think, in a lot of places, and rightly so, for people looking to do this. Generally, a house that has very, very good ventilation, like a Passive House, will perform better and have better indoor air quality, regardless of what materials you use, though. So, theoretically, you could build it with really nasty materials, and a minimum code house would have way worse air than a Passive House would, even if it was built with really nasty materials.
Yeah. When you just and Mark, when you talk about air quality, I want to emphasize, when every fall we have our Passive House days, open house, where people who own a Passive House or a commercial space or a town hall or a Subaru dealership, as we have in Alberta, that are Passive House, invite you in. The best way to understand Passive House is to go into one and shut the door behind you, and you'll hear the quietness, and you'll get a sense of what Mark is talking about really well built, good quality air and quietness. So it doesn't matter if it's a town hall, a Subaru dealership, or a family residence. They all share those characteristics. So keep your eyes open this fall for a list of places, a list of Passive Houses in your community that you'd be able to visit.
Yeah,
Oh,
and that's the biggest piece of feedback we get from our clients is, "Oh, I can't hear the road."
Yeah.
We have a question here. How do you foresee achieving net zero on houses deemed heritage by municipalities?
Well,
it's a good question, and we've spent a lot of time over the past year working with municipalities across the country, because a lot of them have declared climate emergencies. A lot of them want some policy and technical help as they write their bylaws. And we are talking to the federal government about some of the biggest buildings, heritage type buildings in Canada, about how they can do an interfit and still maintain the facade. It's been done. I can assure you it's been done. It hasn't been done a lot in Canada. But Yale, I believe Yale University, some of its most historic buildings have been interfitted and maintained that heritage designation. And it has certainly been done by the score across the UK and other parts of Europe, where there's a lot of cathedrals and town halls that are all heritage properties, much older than ours, and they have been interfitted to maintain the historical aspect. So it can be done. We haven't done a lot of it in Canada, but we're getting more and more inquiries from, I recently had one of the largest dioceses in Canada, talk about what are they going to do with their cathedrals that cost them millions to heat every year? Could they interfit them? And, there's all the heritage issues. So there's great interest. I don't have a clear path from A to B, but certainly by working with municipalities and showing how it's been done in other jurisdictions, it can be done.
Great.
We've looked at a few churches as well. They're actually pretty good candidates and relative easy retrofits. But so with retrofits, I'd be surprised if you're going to get a lot of those to net zero. And that's maybe an unrealistic goal for a retrofit. You don't have the roof plan, you don't have the space, and it's not going to be quite as efficient as a new house, even if you go really, really deep in it. But that's okay, because we can use the new housing construction and be a little extra efficient there, and then the rest can be made up by renewables elsewhere.
Okay, thanks so much, guys. Okay, so we have a question from Craig. Is there a way to control the humidity in a passive house?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, very easily. In fact, according to the gauge over there, I'm sitting at 50% right now, which does not move in our house. So our HRV controls that. We can set it to control automatically. That ventilation is absolutely critical when we're going airtight, especially in our West Coast climate here. The humidity control has traditionally been a problem in regular houses. The passive house does solve that problem, and it's through the ventilation.
Okay. Thank you. Liz, who's in the next room here, has a question. She asked if Passive House has any show homes that are showcased in Parade of Homes that the home builders typically host.
Good question. So, that's what that session in the fall is. It's a Passive House Parade of Homes, essentially.
It's
the house
separate
I'm
from
in,
the Home Builders Association.
Yeah, yeah. The house I'm in right now actually had about 1,000 people through it when we first moved in, and then I had to promise my wife she wasn't going to live in a show home, and that got shut down. So we're no longer showing it now. But typically Passive House types of people that build these are people that are really keen and excited about it and do want to show it off.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's good. And that can be found on the website, right, Chris? You said the lists of where that's
yes,
happening.
Yeah. We'll have that this fall.
Okay, perfect. So this is from Pauline. Are there any Canadian products for combined ERV and heat pumps currently available?
Not that I'm aware of. I've heard tell of these in Europe. There's some compact units, and a lot of that might be kind of nice to see, particularly in the multifamilies where we're looking for really small units. One of our challenges here is that it's hard to find heating units and sometimes even HRVs that are small enough. The European models could do it, but the combined units, as far as I know, aren't realistically available here in Canada.
Okay. Thank you. Chris, I think this one's for you. Is Passive House Canada hoping the government steps in to provide regulation so that passive houses in a hot housing markets maintain affordability?
Oh boy, I could take the entire hour talking about affordability in housing, given my past careers. Affordability is what's required, but it's certainly what's required in a hot housing market. Only going to get hotter, I suspect, in the next little while. But ultimately, when it comes to a passive house, and this is the question we get all the time, there is a myth that there is a green premium one pays for living in a passive house. That may have been early, or that was common in earlier buildings. It's not necessarily the same now, depending on the form and function and the finish of the passive house you want to live in. But to automatically think that a passive house is going to cost more, so therefore needs some protection in a hot housing market, I think we can start off by saying passive houses don't necessarily have to cost any more. Mm-hmm. The rest of the question about what government should be doing around the housing market, I could literally take an hour talking about that, so I won't. I'll stop there and simply say there's a whole range of things that government could be doing to both promote net zero and affordable housing. Mark, your thoughts?
Yeah, it's I don't know. I mean, the house that I'm in right now, which we've lived in for a long time, it was the cheapest house I could have built for myself, because the extra we spent on it was, and we put that on our mortgage. That extra was less than the energy, was less than the energy savings, right? So So this house was cheaper for us to live in day one. It's been a cash positive for us, ever since we moved in those terms. It would have been more expensive for us to build a minimum code house. And we're seeing that throughout the market when we understand the passive house principles, we take care and we design for affordability as well as performance. And all of our projects have done that quite successfully. But we can go the opposite way too. I was in a house the other day that had a $60,000 staircase. Did approximately the same thing as a $2,000 staircase. It went up to the next level. So people will spend as much money as they want. And so certainly there are expensive passive houses out there, but there are also very inexpensive passive houses out there as well.
So I'll jump in for 1 second more. One of the largest sectors to adopt passive house is social housing, is affordable housing groups across the country, and they're doing that because of affordability. I can think of one, the largest affordable housing provider in Canada, the second largest in North America, is Toronto Community Housing. And they've committed to interfitting about 200 of their towers. And they're doing that because when they crunch the numbers, they want to make sure that people have a healthy, comfortable house to live in. And I suspect what they're really looking at as well is the incredible energy savings and the mechanical savings, the operational savings of those buildings. So if there is government policy, it would be to drive towards this type of housing because ultimately it costs less.
Okay. Thank you.
One of our local First Nations here did that as well. They looked at the numbers and they crunched the numbers on that sort of thing, and they built themselves a passive house for their kind of elder center and stuff like that. And that was the same thing they were looking at. They were also looking at health as a leading indicator of poverty as well. So if you can put people into a healthy building, that improves all these other things as well. And so I think, this sort of whole system approach to health and wellness, starts at home, right? We need a healthy home to have good wellness in our full life.
Yeah, that's a really great point. We have another question from Andy, which was regarding, have municipalities indicated whether they'll insist on a net zero or a result before they allow a permit for a renovation?
Mark, why don't you deal with that?
Yeah.
You deal with the building officials more than I do.
Yeah, so that's where we spend most of our time actually, is showing them that, yeah, we're good on that. So in BC, for those that don't know, we have the BC Energy Step Code, and the areas where we primarily work are already about halfway up that scale to what the government is calling net zero ready, which may or may not be actually net zero at the meter. Yeah, that's when we essentially do a permit compliance form that shows the energy modeling and the theoretical compliance of this house, and then we test in construction, we test the air leakage, we test, those sorts of things. We verify the insulation to validate that energy model. We don't test at the meter, that's not done yet, but certainly those energy models are validated to be sort of close enough. And so that is being done. That is what I would expect going forward, that builders are going to need to submit a energy compliance form along with things like their structural compliance and building plans and things like that. That is the way it's done in most homes in BC right now.
Okay.
And Jess, I can add to that Passive House spends a lot of time working with building departments, municipal building departments, building officials. We've worked with a couple of provincial building associations. And it's all around education, because you don't want, for example, the bylaw, the planning department to know and promote passive house or not to know anything about it. So we spend a lot of time educating folks about passive house and what it means.
Which is incredibly important, I think, too, as it sort of, the word of it spreads across Canada as well.
Absolutely.
So we have another question. Thanks you for sharing your thoughts and expertise. When a concrete slab is incorporated into a passive house design, are there new specifications for the concrete to minimize embodied carbon?
Well, why don't we take it one step further, as Mark and I were discussing the other day, and some interesting and innovative ways of not even using a concrete pad in a house at all. But Mark, maybe the questioner is talking about embodied carbon. And certainly there will be, Passive House Canada is doing more and more work in embodied carbon. We'll be bringing a training session and some software to the Canadian marketplace to help building designers, engineers more quickly calculate embodied carbon in all the products they're going to incorporate into this building. But I like the idea if, I like the question is, do we even need that pad to begin with? But Mark, jump in there.
Well, I think we decided that no, we don't need it. We just got to be a little innovative about how we design our building, and we've done a couple of buildings with very little concrete, for different ways. And so if we can do that, that I think would be ideal. Maybe not in all circumstances, but yeah. I mean, the concrete again isn't governed by the Passive House standard. That would be governed by our other other things that we're looking for in the project, which would be low upfront carbon, that sort of thing. And there are ways we can change the concrete. Fly ash is sort of fallen out of fashion right now just because we're not getting as much fly ash anymore from less coal plants and things like that. And I think it is still being used. We just can't get it as easily here on the West Coast. But other fillers and aggregates and things that reduce the amount of trucking or other things that are going into the concrete are certainly an option, and I think a good option. We're seeing a lot of the carbon cure concrete around here, which they're injecting carbon into the concrete or CO2 into the concrete. Seems to be a viable option. More concerned though, I think, than the concrete itself, because I think in some ways we are pretty limited, especially here on the West Coast, where we've got really high structural load requirements for our seismic. We are a bit limited on what we can do with our concrete in terms of the formulas. The more concern there would be what we insulate that concrete with. And so the types of insulation, and I'd love for somebody to invent some hemp linseed oil thing that I can bury and the rats won't eat, and it will keep insulated. But right now we are pretty limited with foams and things like that for sub grade insulation. There's better and worse foams, but that's kind of a lot of times what we're stuck with. And so that's typically where we worry more about it, and we'll limit the amount we use there rather than sort of messing with that concrete, just because that gets a little dicey with our structural engineers.
Okay, thank you. We have a two-part question from Gail. Her first part of the question is, do all passive house buildings have to have solar panels on the roof?
No, not at all. You can be tied in, you can be tied into the grid. The idea, I think Passive House is well suited if you want to go off grid and have solar panels, or even stay on grid and feed in. Passive Houses, because of their low energy usage, makes sense if you've got ability and to put some solar panels on the roof and top the grid up. That's a good thing, but it's not a prerequisite.
Okay. And her second part of the question is she's not clear the difference between net zero energy and passive house construction, as the two terms are kind of used interchangeably. Can you define the two a little bit better?
Well, I would suggest that Passive House has been around since the 1970s. It has always moved towards net zero. So the two terms can be used interchangeably. What Passive House offers is a pathway forward. It offers a building standard to get to net zero, rather than trying to figure it out and everyone trying to figure it out on their own. It offers a very set way to move to net zero. So Mark, you've been doing this longer than I. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say a certified Passive House is net zero ready. And it is usually, if you put enough solar panels on the roof, would be net zero with the solar panels, and that's kind of the difference there. There are a number of branded programs out there that are branding net zero as a term, and so they would define it a little bit differently. But generally, if we're talking about your energy use at your meter, I would say Passive House net zero ready with solar panels is net zero.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Okay, now I have some questions. Who's driving the demand for Passive House? Demographically, who are the people that are asking for these types of homes? Is there a specific age group, a gender, a type, a client profile that's asking for these?
You take a kick at it,
Okay.
Mark, and then I'll
Okay. Well, when we first started doing this a decade ago, we were kind of worried that it was just going to be the crazy hippies and like somebody was going to roll up in some 60s van and stuff like that. But as it turns out, that's not the case. I mean, sure, there's those types of people as well, and we're happy to sell to them too. But generally, it's people who are after comfort and health, and that is a huge range. So our clients range from downsizing couples to young families to professional couples. I couldn't necessarily pick a demographic. They do. I mean, there are people who can afford a house, and in BC, that's saying something. They're not. You've got to have a decent income in BC to be able to afford a house. But it's not people I would traditionally associate with like the tree huggers or anything like that. It's actually not those type of people.
Okay.
It's people who want a good, healthy home, which I think if you're shopping for a home, that's one of the things you probably tell your realtor. I want a good, healthy home. And actually, a lot of the people that have purchased our homes didn't realize what it was. They looked at it and said, wow, they're using healthy materials. Look at that ventilation. That'll give me great air, that sort of thing. And then they realize, oh, this has got this cool sticker on there too. And, all these other side benefits that I didn't even know about.
And I'll quickly say the other real growth that's happening isn't necessarily a demographic. It is, as I mentioned before, the social housing organizations across the country, whether it be Toronto Community Housing, Hamilton, Ottawa, out in BC. They've adopted Passive House. Many of them have adopted Passive House and EnerFit for their renovation standard. And again, it's what Mark is saying. It's to provide a healthy and comfortable place for people to live in. And then the energy savings on top of that they're able to reinvest in more properties.
Okay. Well, I think this is going to be my last question for you guys, which is obviously you guys have referenced a lot of BC, Ontario, even Alberta are having higher end growth in Passive House, but we're not seeing that maybe in Saskatchewan or Manitoba. Is there a barrier or a perception as to why it's not being as big a growth here? Because I know I've heard people's perception of Passive House is it cannot withstand a harsh climate.
Well, that's one of
as
the
it snows outside my window. So.
These are exactly the more severe the climate, the better a Passive House the more a Passive House makes sense, quite frankly. So
it's the opposite.
Yeah, the opposite. I mean, we're working with the Manitoba trades, right? Why? Because they see what's on the horizon. They're talking to legislators. They know where the Manitoba Building Code is going. They're talking to trades and architects and engineers in Manitoba. And they've come to us and said, we need to get people trained up. So, various parts of Canada are at different stages of development. But it's coming. And that's why I was trying to emphasize at the beginning about the harmonized national building code that is driving us to net zero ready by 2030 and then by 2050. So it's coming no matter where you are in Canada, it's coming. And what Passive House Canada is here to do is to help businesses get ready for the legislative change that is coming. But before even legislative change comes in, what we're finding is just general awareness. I mean, I've been with Passive House for about 13, 14 months now, and we track all of the hits to our website. And it used to be, we'll say 60% were from BC because that's where the action was. But just in the past year and a half alone, that's really changed. And it's really changed to reflect interest from other parts of the country. So that instead of being 60% of the hits, BC is now worth about 30, 40% of the hits. Same number, actually increasing numbers even in BC, but the rest of Canada has really grown from coast to coast to coast. People are hearing about this Passive House thing. They're wanting to learn more. And we're here to help business get ready.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right. I think we that is it. And we were actually at exactly on time. I just want to thank Mark and Chris for being here. And if anybody's looking for more information, it's www.passivehousecanada.com. And there's been some links being posted in the chat while we've been talking of all the stuff that Chris and Mark have referred to. Thank you so much for being here. It was really interesting. I think every time I learn a little bit more about Passive House, so I get more and more excited when I I hear about it. And I think for our members, it's definitely something that, as you said, it's on the horizon. The demand is going to be coming, and they're going to be getting more questions from contractors, from builders wanting to build like this. So it is wonderful to learn more about it.
Great. Love to partner with anyone.
Yeah,
Wonderful. Okay. Well, thank you so much. And thank you to our sponsor today, Taiga Building Products. And everyone take care. A recording will go up on our website shortly. Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you so much, Chris. Take care.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Okay. Bye.